Hi everyone, I'm Madhavi Nawana Parker and I'm your host tonight. It's my absolute privilege to be presenting on this topic for Parenting SA, a wonderful organisation, a great resource here in South Australia that is supporting parents all the way. And tonight's topic is one, as we discovered very quickly in the first week or two, with a booked out tickets of 1,100 people, and we had to cap it there. And if anything, that tells you you're not alone. If you're sitting here right now and you're wanting solutions and you're not quite sure what to do, I think one of the best things that we can do for ourselves as parents is remember that just because we're struggling or finding something difficult or don't have all the answers, that does not mean we're failing. It does not mean that we're not doing the right thing. You know, parenting's a tough gig. I have 3 young children of my own. I had the luck of being able to practice on other people's children through my work for a good decade before I became a mother myself. And these are tools and skills that take time to learn and develop. So please don't be hard on yourself. I'm so glad you're here tonight. We are looking at proactive solutions. We are looking at creating the kind of environment and relationships between siblings and with each of our children so that we're creating a foundation where they're less likely to fight and where the fights are less likely to be as toxic and hurtful. We have no magic wand. I have nothing for you this evening that's going to take conflict out of your home. Conflict is a normal part of life. It's impossible for us to always get along with others or always be happy with what's going on when things involve other people. We all know this as adults, and the wonderful thing about being a child in 2020 is that we have all this wonderful knowledge about how to build emotional intelligence, how to teach our children to resolve conflict in positive ways, in constructive ways. We weren't necessarily taught these tools early on in our own lives, so it's a great opportunity for us to be able to teach this to our children so they have the best chance to get along long term. So the first thing you need to remove is any kind of guilt. You know, we are all doing the very best we can with the skills and knowledge we have at the time. We love our children. We want the best for our children. That's why we're sitting in this room here together tonight. And it's just one of those things, you know, the parenting relationships complex. It takes up a lot of time and emotional energy. A lot of us are sleep deprived. And in those moments, you know, when you're sitting here and we're going through all of these strategies, I can tell you right now, you'll think, yes, I can do that. That's easy, that's common sense, fantastic. The reality is in that moment when you've got a real child in front of you and they're in the middle of a conflict, it is so much harder to respond in the way that you've planned and in the way that you really want to. So be kind to yourself, be forgiving of that challenge, and know that you're not alone, that we're also learning skills while we teach them to our children. We're also developing those tools ourselves to be calm, to know how to respond when everyone in front of us is not calm, and that takes time. So let's get stuck into it. I'm going to provide you with a practical framework with evidence-based tools that are useful for you to use straight away, but take your time. You know, pick what matches you and your family best. Nobody knows your children better than you, and you will be able to look at this and think, right, that's for my family, that's not for my family, or I might try that a little bit later. Take your time. There's absolutely no rush. Perhaps pick your top 1 or 2 strategies from tonight and then give them a go and see how they are for your family, and then adapt along the way. So I'm going to start by really looking at the foundation that gives your children the best chance of getting along better over time and also staying connected beyond those early years. And so once we've built that foundation, it means that the children have got that opportunity to respond to conflict with their brothers and sisters in a more reasonable way. Now, because they're children, we have to always remember brain maturity. So until young people are in their mid-20s, they are still finding it difficult to manage impulses, manage emotions, see things from other people's perspectives. And as you know, these are all crucial skills for being able to handle conflict in a respectful way. So we show that understanding that our children have got their learners' plates on. We've also got our learners' plates on. And it will take many, many, many conflicts and many attempts at resolving them in a respectful way before we start to see some really good changes. So we've just got to stick with it, be a little bit resilient ourselves, not take it personally if it's still a bit of a struggle in time, and just to understand that we will get there. Conflict is part of life. Siblings are great practice for learning other people's limits, learning your own limits, and learning how to express them in a way that people listen to you. But we have to teach our children how to do that. They don't automatically have those skills. So I've got hundreds of questions here that have already come through, which is really exciting. I won't have time to get through all of them, but there's some really clear common themes. And the good news is I'm pretty sure this presentation tonight will cover most of your questions here. I think the trickiest one is the questions around how do I know that the conflict at home at the moment is normal? Because that's the challenge, isn't it? Is sometimes in your family, it will feel like this doesn't feel right, or oh, this is just part of being a brother or sister. I really want you all to tune into your own gut instinct about that one. If you feel something's not right and your child is really pushing limits and it's affecting the sense of safety and security that your child has in the home with that sibling, it's really worth getting some advice around that. But by the end of tonight's presentation, hopefully you'll have some more information up your sleeve to help you with that. And I will give you all the heads up about my voice. I talk for a living, but I also talk for fun. And so occasionally it will, by this time of the evening after doing lots of speaking, it is a little bit hoarse and it does disappear for a while. And I'm sure you'll forgive me if I need to pause for a drink of water. So siblings, the perfect storm. It really is, isn't it? I mean, you put a bunch of people into a house with underdeveloped brains. I mean that in the most respectful way possible, but little people, and a little person can also be a 17-year-old, because you remember I said at the beginning, until we're 25, at least, you know, our brains are still going through massive growth. So we're learning to handle really complex things. You know, problem solving doesn't come easily when you're in a grumpy mood or you're feeling really mad at someone else. And so we put them all into this house and it's beautiful and it's wonderful, but at the end of the day, what could possibly go wrong? Heaps of things are going to go wrong when there's people with competing demands. They want you, you know, you're the parent, you're the most valuable resource in the house. And there's one of you or two of you, and many of you, like myself, are outnumbered. And so you've got everyone in together with brains that are still maturing, who have a separate set of wants and needs, usually at the exact same time, usually when you're in a hurry. And in those moments, it can be really, really challenging as a parent to know what to do. But you're going to remind yourself, this is normal. This is what happens in families. And we're going to build the kind of foundation so we're sticking to the healthy kind of conflict that your children can really learn and grow from and stay connected in the long term. So I don't have any magic wands for you. I'm really, really sorry about that. There were a few people that asked me desperately. In fact, there were many of you that asked, how do I stop this? How do we stop sibling conflict? How do I just get them to love each other and be best friends? Well, here's the thing, is they do love each other and they don't want to be arguing with each other all the time, but they are in a relationship with their siblings, and all relationships are about multiple perspectives coming into the same space. So we can't stop conflict, and we don't even want to stop conflict, because if we just didn't allow our children to express when they're not happy about something, or to state the things they like or dislike, we're really shutting down an important part of their growth. So I don't have any magic wands. I don't have anything that's going to stop you, but please stay with me and don't disappear, because I have lots of tools that will hopefully mean that the kind of conflict your children are having is a much healthier conflict that leads to good neurological and psychological growth. So let's hang in there. So first, we've got to look at our challenges. I'm not going to give you a whole bunch of strategies and then wish you well. If we don't look at this on the deepest kind of level and really look at all of the challenges and all of the things that we need to keep in mind, then I'd be doing you a great disservice, and you would continue to have this challenge, and all you'd be doing is putting out a grass fire here, a grass fire there, and 3 years later still thinking, I just want peace in my house. So let's look at why it's so hard to be consistently calm, compassionate, and understanding. So we all know that we need to be those things, right? It's in every parenting book. It's everywhere that we look. We all know logically why it's important. We all know that when we're having a tough time, we want the people who love us to be compassionate and calm and understanding and there for us. The reality is when our children are upset, in that moment when they're upset with each other and they're having a conflict, those conflicts come with high emotion, and high emotion is a very quick trigger for most of us. And until we're really good at learning how to manage our stress and look after our well-being and be able to manage our own emotions, it's incredibly hard to be calm when right in front of you there is no calm in sight. So that's the first thing that's really challenging. The next thing that's really challenging is in that moment of pressure, when our children are telling on each other and they're upset or they're fighting, and you just want it to end and you just want them to be nice to each other, you're feeling hurt and upset as well. And so you're absorbing some of that, and that's having an impact on your judgment, and it's having an impact on your clarity of thought as well. So we've got to forgive ourselves for feeling a bit brain fuzzy in those moments, because we all want to be nice about it. We all want to be calm about it. But in that moment, there's so much more going on that we need to address to really reach our ultimate goal, which is for us to be able to be the calm in the storm, the point of, the anchor when there's chaos all around. And you will get there. We all get there. But it's a conscious effort, and it's a conscious daily practice, and with a lot of forgiveness for ourselves if we are finding that hard. The other thing that's really, really challenging is that surge of powerlessness. In that moment, and it's not just sibling conflict, it's basically anything with our kids when they don't cooperate, right? So you've asked them to pick something up, you've asked them, to come, it's time to go, you're running late. At any moment when they say no or they refuse to cooperate, it's really frustrating. It's a little bit easier when they're a little baby and you can still pick them up and buckle them in their seat and, give them something to keep them going. As they get older and bigger, we learn as parents something that no one really tells us, which is you can't control another person's behavior. You can't make anybody do anything against their will. And that's the hardest, perhaps, challenge for all of us as parents, is learning to develop the kind of relationship where, as much as possible, you're able to communicate in a respectful way based on a nice, strong and loving relationship where they're more likely to listen. But bear in mind, they're kids, and they don't listen all the time, and they don't want to do a bunch of stuff that we as adults know are really important for them to do. So we can't expect 100% cooperation all the time. It would be unrealistic for us, and we would just be stressed out of our brains if we thought this family life was meant to be following this beautiful straight line of, oh yes, I woke up in the morning and here's what I planned and it went exactly like that. We've all learnt by now, most of us have had enough experience as parents to know that that's not the colour of life. And if it was maintained to that level of perfection, before you burnt out, and before your children were withholding so much stuff, what would also mean is they're missing these opportunities to learn and grow. You know, it's like with any challenge in our life, every time things don't go according to plan, every time we reach an obstacle, every time we have a conflict with another human being, it's an opportunity to learn if we let it be an opportunity to learn. And so that's what our kids are doing. You know, they're not going to escape conflict across their lifespan. They're going to continue to have relationships with people outside the family. They'll have workplaces, they'll have partners, marriages, all kinds of relationships in their life, and those relationships will face conflict. And what siblings provide is a wonderful opportunity for us to skill our children up to know what to do when they're not happy about a situation, to know what to do when someone's done something that really annoys them and has crossed their boundaries and they feel uncomfortable. We can teach our children how to respond to their sibling in a respectful way, to regulate their feelings in a calm way, and to then be so much better by the time that brain maturation comes around. They've got all of these fantastic skills at managing stress and conflict that they'll be able to take into their marriages, their relationships, their friendships, and their workplaces. So we remember these things take time, and we remember that they're learning a skill and they won't get it right a lot of the time, and they'll make those mistakes and will say really nice things like, you're not the first person to make that mistake, and I know you're doing your best with this, and it's really hard having a problem with another person. And we just show that we get it, and we don't simplify siblings and conflict and make it like, oh, you should just get along, you're really lucky to have each other. But we will talk more about that as we go along. So remember, when you're feeling powerless, and the timing of their conflict is the other point on this slide, is it's never really convenient, is it, when our children have a conflict? It's always when you're in a hurry. It's always when you're busy. It's always when you've just sat down to have a microsecond to yourself, and then boom, there's a problem. So you least feel like being that calm, compassionate person that you know you want to be and that you are, but in that moment you're like, this was my moment, or I just need to get out the door, or I really need to finish this for work. You know, we juggle so much as parents. There's so much that we need to do. In addition to our role, we carry enormous mental loads. And so we must be kind and forgiving of ourselves, that none of us are getting this right all the time. None of us are able to be compassionate all the time, but we are all capable of getting better at it with time, if we're forgiving enough of ourselves to see that we are learning and that that's okay, and then in good time we'll make it. So let's keep going. So I'd like us to think about changing the lens on sibling conflict. So a lot of the questions and comments that came through and that are continuing to come through are really just that feeling of intense frustration. And I hear you. It is frustrating. I mean, conflict's such a yucky thing to be around. It's so unpleasant having someone fight around you. So you're not alone if you feel uncomfortable when your children are arguing. I want us to look at it a little bit differently. And this really helps me as a parent, even though it's still a really challenging thing for me to respond to. I try to see it from my children's perspective, and I try to remember as much as possible that just like me and just like you, our children want peace, and they want a speedy, calm and reasonable solution to the problem they're facing just as much as you do. So they don't like conflict. They don't wake up in the morning wanting to disagree with us or with each other. You know, we like harmony. Harmony feels good, but conflict is part of life. And until you're really good at handling conflict, it just feels yuck. And so when we're looking at sibling conflict, rather than, I guess, where so many of us are feeling like, it shouldn't be happening. I want them to get along. They should be peaceful. They're lucky to have a sibling. Lots of kids don't have brothers and sisters, which are all normal feelings we have. But the reality of it is they really, really aren't asking for this. This is part of life, is that you will disagree. And people will cross the line, and you will make mistakes and cross the line sometimes, and then it's your turn to make it better. And all we can do is to help ourselves empathize with our children and be more likely to show compassion, is remember, my child wants this over just as much, and they believe they're right. I mean, you think about the last time you had a conflict with somebody, or I think about the last time, you think you're right. That's why you're in conflict with the other person. You've got two opposing views. That person thinks they're right. You think they're right. If you've got more than two kids, there's a whole bunch of people thinking they're right. And then you just wanting it all over. So in that moment, when you think you're right, you really feel there's been an injustice and you really want things sorted out. So it always helps me to see it that way, that even if from my perspective as someone who has, 30 years more life experience, or probably more now, 30 plus, maybe 40 plus years of experience with our three children, I'm experienced at life. So I can look at their conflict, and I can look at other children that I'm working with them that look at conflict and think, well, that's so small. But to a child, it's big. That's why they're having it. So it softens our heart just that little bit when we're able to just remember, take that agenda off to put an end to it, and just remember, my kid's really struggling right now. They're having a really, really tough time right now, and they are seeking my support to get through it. And we'll talk on how you can do that very, very soon. So the other thing we can look at is I've mentioned it already, really, is sibling conflict and rivalry provides a learning opportunity for our children's personal growth and also for our family's growth. So if we are going to teach these tools that we're looking at together this evening, if we teach these tools to our children, we're building their emotional intelligence. So no one can respond perfectly every time or use these methods every time. I certainly can't. It's always easier in theory, but we're all still figuring out how to do it consistently all the time. We all know we're meant to do everything consistently, but don't be hard on yourself if you're still figuring out how to be more consistent. Being hard on yourself is not going to make this any better. Being understanding and self-compassionate will, and in good time, you'll be right where you want to be. I'm sure of that. So with that opportunity for growth, we look at that and we think, my child is learning, my child is growing, they're starting to develop an awareness about themselves because I'm coaching them. I'm not saving them or rescuing the conflict. I'm coaching them. I'm respecting that their disagreements are to do with them, and I'm not the expert in their challenges, particularly after about the age of 5 or 6. We want them to really feel like they are the expert, and we will talk about what I mean exactly by that very shortly in a slide that's coming. So look at it as an opportunity to growth. My kid is growing conflict resolution muscles every time they resolve a dispute with their sibling in a constructive and helpful way. And even when they don't, because they won't all the time, even after you've taught all of these skills, children operate off emotion and their brains are so young and they're still developing that experience. So they're not going to get it right all the time, and you just acknowledge their effort to give it a go. And when they are responding well to each other, when they're getting along, when they're handling things well, you notice it and you point it out and say, I've noticed you guys are working so hard to talk through your feelings and your challenges, and it just makes me feel so proud of you, because I know it's not easy to handle problems with other people, and I think you guys are doing a really great job, and this will just keep getting easier as you get older. And you just encourage them so that they keep trying, because they are trying, but they need the skills and they need those tools to do that. So remember the bigger picture. A lot of the questions I also had here was, I'm really worried. My children fight all the time. It feels like that's all they do. They bicker over everything. They can't share. I don't have the ages of these children, but I can tell you, you're not alone, because that is a question that was repeated multiple times. There was a good 100 repetitions of that question, because that is how it is through different stages and ages. And also personality and temperament, and we'll talk about that shortly as well, has a huge impact on which children are more likely to have that kind of bickery kind of way of interacting with each other. But remember that bigger picture, that just because they're having lots of conflict right now, and because they can't share stuff or agree on a TV show or sit at the dinner table without poking someone or saying, he's looking at me funny, or no, she is, no, he started it. Even though all of that stuff, you're right in the heat of it at the moment, when your children are still at that stage where they're experiencing conflict, it's really hard to not worry that down the track, when they're in their 20s and 30s, are they still going to be fighting? Are they going to hate each other? You know, we worry about all of these people, and none of us have got a crystal ball, but the reality is just because they're struggling now doesn't mean they're always going to struggle. We've got to stay hopeful. We've got to continue to teach them skills, and know that most of the time these things do resolve themselves well. And particularly when our children are consciously taught the tools to manage their emotions and their conflict. So keep that bigger picture in mind. Try not to hit that panic button. Stay out of the emergency lane. Take your time. Keep loving, keep hoping, and hang in there. So it's important when we look at siblings, you know, there are two things. There's conflict and there's rivalry. And if we were all together in the room as planned, if we were all together in a space, I'd be giving you some time, and I'd love you to take some time after this session to really sit down and think, well, are my children having heaps and heaps of conflicts, heaps and heaps of rivalry, a bit of both? And the difference, very briefly, between those two things is sibling conflict is that really normal everyday stuff that children have between each other. It's not particularly hurtful. It's like, he touched my thing, he didn't ask, she didn't, you know, she didn't say sorry when she bumped into me, she's not sharing, she wants to watch that TV show and she always gets to pick. It's conflict over stuff, it's conflict over a situation, a conflict over particular wants and needs, usually relatively benign kind of things. So that's a conflict, a little tiff over everyday things. Rivalry is a little bit different. It's a much more competitive kind of sibling interaction, and it's usually centered around competition for parental attention, competition for parental approval, really wanting to be the best child, really wanting to be the person that's getting the most attention at that time. And that rivalry can get ugly when it's not monitored and observed and watched and discussed with the child. And I'll give you plenty of tools on how to do all of this as we move along together through this session. But it's just important to differentiate what's really going on for your child. What are they fighting about? Are they fighting because they just want time with me? Are they fighting because they don't feel noticed in that moment for whatever reason? They're perceiving that they're not getting the attention that they want and need in that moment. What is going on? And when we know this, you know, we're really building our understanding of our family and our family dynamics and the sibling dynamics too. And then we're much more likely to be able to respond to whatever it is that's going on in a constructive way ourselves. So generally speaking, conflict is it's really straightforward, folks. It's two or more people with different wants and needs, usually at the exact same time. Hugely inconvenient. So this is part of the challenge, isn't it? So navigating conflict calmly and constructively requires skills. I mean, life is just an ongoing experience of gathering skills, gathering social skills, emotional skills. All of these things take time and develop. I'm still learning every time, no matter what stage of life you're at. you'll experience new conflicts, new challenges that require a new set of skills. They require you to be psychologically flexible and to adapt to what you already know and add new information. It is the same for our children. So the conflicts they're having as a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old over a toy that neither of them can share because they're just really little and they don't know how to be calm. And when you're not calm, you're not thinking. So it's very different to a 15 and a 7-year-old arguing over someone taking their phone without asking. So those conflicts are completely different at different stages and require different skills and different responses from us. And like I said at the beginning, you are the expert of your family. Never doubt that intuition, you know, that we all have, that we can sometimes give a little bit of that away because there's so much information out there for us as parents that tells us, you know, do this, don't do that. And some of us spend half the time just really scared, like, I don't want to wreck my children. Do I do that? Don't I do that? What's working, what's not? So we've got to be really in tune with ourselves and know that our hearts do speak to us and do give us a lot of information, and there's no standard way of doing anything because you're talking about your children, your family, and your value system. So we know that these skills take time. And of course, these skills, you've got to teach them, then you've got to practice them, and then brain maturity's got to come to the party as well. So there's so much going on that can complicate things. But when we know that there's so much going on, perhaps that will help you be a little kind, you know, kind to yourself and understand that there is a reason why there's conflict going on in your house, and there's a reason why you've registered for this event. So let's keep going. Oh, my screen seems to have frozen. There we go. So the next thing as we lay this foundation is to really understand our biases. And this is a really tricky one. This takes, and again, if we were in a room together, we would pause for 5 or 10 minutes. And if you were there with someone, you'd have a little chat. So I want you to do this in your own time after this session, is to really have a good, honest think about, are you by any chance unintentionally supporting one child more over the other? And none of us want to do this. It's never in our plan, but it's important to note that for many of us, there are some biases that naturally exist and that make it easier to be compassionate to one child over the other. So I've put a couple of the things down there. The first is, you know, really having a good understanding of what your experience was as a sibling and what your thoughts are about it and whether or not they have any impact on how you respond to your children as siblings. The second is really consider your birth order as well. So, you know, if you were a firstborn, you'll understand what it's like being a firstborn. You're expected to, you know, be the one that should know better, and you often have more responsibilities. You often do some things later on, and there are things that come in that birth order that have an impact. And if you are a firstborn, you might find yourself feeling more empathy for your firstborn child. You might not, but you might, and it's important to understand that if you're a middle child, you'll get what that meat in a sandwich thing feels like, and if you're the youngest, you'll also know what that feels like. And so that just makes it so much easier to feel compassion when there's conflict, when you already understand one part of their position. So just be aware of it, because children sense it, and so many of our unconscious things do come across unintentionally and are translated, and children with their very young brains can really misjudge that and make up their own mind and their own perceptions, which we need to, you know, keep an eye on. And the third thing is our children's temperament and our temperament. So, you know, if you've got a child who's got a very similar temperament to yours and similar interests to you, well, it's going to be infinitely easier to have that bond and to respond to conflict in a compassionate way from their perspective. And in the same light, if your child has a directly opposite temperament to yours and you're thinking, I don't understand why this is happening, why they're like that, then you're going to perhaps feel emotionally triggered by that different kind of temperament as well. And that can have an impact on how you respond. So it's just like anything, you know, we need to have that self-awareness. We need to be really brave and look at what's really going on and look at all the layers and figure them out. And that's really how we have that best chance for that personal growth. It starts with that self-awareness. And then just being really nice to ourselves and not being mean to ourselves if we find, okay, there's some stuff I need to work on. Who doesn't have stuff they need to work on? So we be kind and compassionate to ourselves, and we just keep going like everybody else, and know that we are all doing the best we possibly can with the skills and knowledge that we have at the time. So why does sibling conflict occur? For so many reasons, so many reasons that we don't have enough time to cover tonight, but it is a messenger, you know, like all behavior, it's communication. It's telling us there's an unmet need or there's a missing skill. And it's normal for them not to get along all the time. So when we look at those points that I have here on this slide, uncomfortable feelings like jealousy, anger, frustration, impatience, impulsivity. And I've even mentioned grief here. I had a couple of questions where people saying, I don't know why my toddler doesn't like the newborn. The newborn's so cute. And I don't know why they're rejecting them. Well, there is some grief for that first and second child and all the children who were there first. When someone else comes, it's exciting. And gosh, they love them so much. And at the same time, their favorite resource, which is you, just got a little more limited. There's a little more, there's a lot more time required to look after that new sibling. And the more children there are in the home, the less time you have for each child. And that's not necessarily a bad thing either. You know, children learn that they can't have your attention all the time. And when we support our children emotionally through that, they're less likely to develop that jealousy. So when we're able to say things like, having this baby around sure does take up a lot of mummy and daddy's time, a lot of my time, doesn't it? And that can be really, really hard, and it's really, really frustrating. And I understand, you know, the more we're able to let them have that pain, let them, not force them into loving this little person, not force them out of those feelings because they've got this precious sibling. When feelings are allowed to exist, they have a better opportunity for the child to then learn and grow and move through and adjust to those uncomfortable feelings. So we need to acknowledge that that conflict is telling us my child's struggling, they've got a really tough feeling and they don't know what to do with that tough feeling. The other reason why conflict can get ugly is because kids don't have the skills to deal with conflict, and they don't have the brain maturity to use the skills you've taught them consistently all the time. So we've got to keep that in mind. So to be able to be good at handling conflict, and our kids are lucky because we're teaching them this as kids, which means they'll be really good at it by the time they become adults and their brain catches up as well. But these missing and incomplete skills that are crucial, for example, is how to express your thoughts and feelings calmly. Now, that's a really hard skill. It takes time. How to stay calm when you're not happy about something. So you think about the last time you were annoyed about something. It's very, very hard to regulate yourself and stay really calm, but you've got 20, 30, 40 years or more life experience at being calm when you haven't got things going the way you want them to be, or being calm when you don't get what you want. We've got life experience and brain maturity on our side. Our children don't have that yet. So again, that skill is a tricky skill. To handle conflict respectfully and constructively, you need to know how to problem solve. Again, that's a skill we have to teach our children. It's also a skill that's not easy to execute. You think about when you reach a problem, the first thing you probably feel is really mad that you have a problem, of course. And so Some of us stay stuck in there and just be mad about the problem, and the problem shouldn't have happened, and then stay there. And then some of us are lucky enough to have the tools to go, okay, I've got a problem. There's no point meeting this problem with resistance, because here it is. And now I need to do something about it and be an active agent in finding a resolution. So when we're looking at problem solving, we want to teach our children how to do that. And we'll talk about that later on. And then that really hard thing of being able to just let stuff go, you know, that's hard, because when you're really annoyed with your sibling and you're a little kid, you don't want to let anything go. You want to fight to the end. And that's because they're young and they don't know much better yet. But that is one of our goals, is to learn, you know, what do I need to resolve with my sibling, and what do I just need to just move through? Because, you know, we can try really hard to instill love and kindness and a beautiful value system in our homes, but there's not a person on earth who's capable of being kind all the time, to resolve things calmly all the time. We're human, and we want our children to know that as much as we want to uphold those good values of kindness and honesty and integrity, they are developing humans, and so are we. And none of us can stay that way all the time. So I put up this, you know, for those of you who don't like looking at rodents, just don't look. But the relevance of this article is, you know, we're in the middle of this pandemic, and there was an article in the New York Post, and they were talking about, you know, without the restaurants having food scraps out, all the rats were just going bonkers. And as you can see from the headline, they weren't being very nice to each other. And what has this got to do with sibling conflict? Not a huge amount, but I thought it was interesting. I'm going to move on from that slide so you don't have to look at the rodent. But what it's saying is in those moments when our most precious resources are not available to us, so in case of siblings, that's you, and your time and your attention. In those moments when we don't have our resources that we so need available to us, and in those moments when our emotions are high, we just simply do not behave as well as we normally would. So we just want to have understanding that parents are a scarce resource in a family, and they're one that all the children want, and all we want is just a moment to breathe and have our lukewarm tea in some sort of quiet, but that's the reality. So just bear it in mind when they're getting really grumpy with each other. It's hard being a kid in conflict with your sibling in that moment. So moving on to feelings, it's so tempting when we're met with an angry child or a jealous child to just want to basically stamp it out so we can move on because we're in a hurry, or because it's just so uncomfortable being around other people's uncomfortable feelings. But we all know so very well that it's really important that when we can, and very few of us can do this all the time, it's a work in progress, but to acknowledge and accept what they're feeling. Because as I said earlier, you can't make another person think or feel how you want them to think or feel. We've got to let them feel and think what they're thinking and feeling. And we've got to show them that we've noticed that when we can. And when we pause and empathize in that way, we're actually showing them, I get it. I get that you're struggling. I hear you. I see you. I understand you. And that's important for two things. It's important, firstly, for our connection with our children. You think about the best relationships of your life. They're with people who get you, who understand you, who give you time and listen and hear you out. And that's exactly how we strengthen that bond with our children. But also in that moment, the other thing it does is our emotions are calmer when they've been noticed. When someone isn't telling us to stop that feeling or trying to fix that feeling through some kind of distraction, just the fact that our emotions have been acknowledged calms us down. Now, it doesn't mean that our children instantly go, thank you so much for acknowledging the pain I'm experiencing right now. I'm feeling so much calmer and I'm ready to be best friends with my sibling. It doesn't work like that. These are all things that are happening in the background of our psychological growth. And it just means next time they have that problem, they'll have that ability to cope with that feeling just a bit better because it was acknowledged and they were able to have that feeling. Because to get good at our feelings, we've got to feel our feelings and regulate our feelings through the support of the people who love us, and also through our own independent development through your guidance of skills and emotional regulation. So we say really nice things when we can, like, you want to play with me right now and I'm really busy. That's really hard, isn't it? So you're just acknowledging that they're having a tough time. It doesn't mean you drop everything. Or when they're in the middle of a disagreement, we show that we have empathy. As I said earlier on, they don't want to be fighting with their siblings. They really, really want peace just as much as you and I do. So in that moment when we can say things, and nobody can say this stuff all the time, right? So just be forgiving of yourself and you just do it as much as possible. But in that moment when you can say something really, you know, be gentle and be kind about it, and maybe even bring in your sense of humor and your personality into it. But if you say something rough along the lines of, whoa, you guys are having a really, really hard time right now. This is a really hard problem to solve, isn't it? When you can't agree what to play on, or when you can't share something that you both really love, or when you both want to watch a different movie tonight, or whatever it is that they're having a disagreement about. When you acknowledge the fact that you can see that there's a difficult problem in front of you, you're not fixing it, but you're acknowledging that they're having a tough time. And because kids, particularly during conflict, because in the moment of conflict, you know, the thinking part of your brain just takes a very inconvenient vacation and disappears. So you're no longer thinking, you're just feeling, you're operating from raw emotion. In that moment, the best thing that we can do is show that we get that they're struggling. And when someone knows that someone has seen that they're struggling, they do start calming down. You know, the brain's really a very clever thing. And if it's given that time for emotions to settle down, the thinking part of the brain has a chance to switch back on. And when we've got the thinking part of our brain switched back on, they're more likely to use the tools that you and I have taught them. But remember, that takes time and that takes practice. We want to let our children, when I talk about playing it through in this slide, and that it's normal, you know, with very young children, with toddlers and preschoolers, you know, play is how they learn. So quite often it's, you know, it's really interesting to watch how a child plays when there's a new sibling, or when they're just really mad at one of their siblings, or they might be mad at a friend at preschool or at school. You know, when you watch them play, they might act out some of those things, and it might look sometimes really horrific to us, like, oh my gosh, look what he's doing to that dinosaur, is that normal? And you're thinking, what is going on? But they're just playing, and sometimes what looks a bit confronting to us is just them working through these really tough emotions and trying to find a way to cope with it and process it and understand it. So when they do this kind of thing, and even, you know, one of the questions I had here was about baby talk, and somebody had asked me, you know, what do I do about baby talk? My 4-year-old is suddenly talking like a baby. They've just had their 3rd child. Well done. And they're like, my 4-year-old was going really, really well. They'd started kindy this year, and now they're talking like a baby all the time, and crying, and everything's gone backwards. You know, a little bit of regression when there's a big change in the family, particularly when there's a new sibling, is really not uncommon. They're processing it. Kids are amazing. They find ways to process their feelings through play, through all kinds of measures. And if we are not too reactive and we give it a bit of time and we notice it and we think, well, what's the need behind this? And it could be as simple for that little guy that's struggling at 4 with this 3rd little baby. So that's, you know, 1 or 2 parents and 3 kids in the house. You're totally outnumbered. So it could just be, I'm really grieving the loss of my parents' time. I'm feeling really, really sad. And that little person is sucking up all the time. So I'm going to be a bit more like that. And so we just have to understand, where's it coming from? And I wish I could say it's as simple as you just give them some more time. I mean, the reality is we're all parents and we're all time poor, and we all know how important time and connection is, and we're all doing our best. And if we just keep doing our best and keep trying to give them as much time and support as we can, you know, we get there. We all get there. We just have to be understanding. And remember, a lot of the questions I'll mention in here as well were, I just want them to like each other and love each other. And I don't know why they fight, you know. They can be the best of friends and the worst of enemies in under 5 minutes. They don't have to love each other all the time or like each other. It was you that decided to have another kid. It wasn't them. They might have said they wanted one. That was before they knew it entailed a whole bunch of other things as well. So we just got to be kind and understanding that there'll be times when they just genuinely are a little burnt out by their sibling. And, you know, often I work with lots of children, and they'll often say, oh, my little brother's so annoying, oh, my big sister's so annoying, and they'll have the same complaints. It's literally the same in every house. After doing this for 20 years, it's like hitting repeat on the same sorts of things that kids bring up with you. And it's really important to just acknowledge, yeah, it is really frustrating, isn't it, having an older sibling or a younger sibling, because sometimes it can be like this. So you show that you understand, you don't minimize their pain, and you allow them to have that, but then, you know, you don't spend a lot of time there either. And we'll talk about that as we go along tonight. I'm conscious of our time together. We've had almost an hour. Hopefully you'll be happy for me to go over a little bit. We'll keep going here together. Oh, you must be wondering why there's that little sticky mouth. How do I get to the previous slide? How do I do that? Oh, you're probably wondering, why is that baby there? That I'm not suggesting that anyone should be taping children up onto a wall, just to clarify. That's just a little reminder to us that that sticky tape, we might want to just imagine that's over our mouths as parents every now and again. Sometimes, you've seen by now how much I talk. It's really a hard thing to be silent in the moment of conflict, in the moment when your children report some grievance with their sibling, or when they're just really upset. It's really hard not to start talking immediately and start dishing out directions and telling them to sort it out. So I put that slide up because you wouldn't want to see a slide with someone with tape over their mouth. It'd not be a very nice slide to look at. So the slide that I've put up is this baby with the gaffer tape everywhere, just as a reminder that pause in that moment of conflict when they bring the problem to you, or any behavioral challenge that your child might be having, just being able to pause in that moment and say nothing can sometimes be all it takes for them to slow down, for you to slow down. You might touch them to show, you might even nod, you might give them a loving look in that moment. So you're acknowledging, I hear you, I get that you're upset, but not saying something. And even better, I often, when I'm working with parents, I remind them that, you know, one of the things that we've really got to do is have these discussions outside of the conflict. So we'll talk about that in more detail in a moment. But what I mean is we can't solve all of this right there in the moment. We want to be able to say to our kids, you know, when you guys get really upset with each other, I find it really hard to be calm. And so when I'm not calm, I usually say something I regret. So I'm trying this new thing out. I don't know if it works, but what I'm going to try is I'm going to try and say nothing until I'm calm enough that my brain can think straight and I can say something sensible. So what you're doing is you're role modeling that you're also developing tools in emotional regulation, and that when you are silent, it doesn't come as a shock to them. Oh my gosh, why? What's happened? My parents are on freeze right now. That they just know that's mum, dad, my carer, whoever it is, just trying to get calm right now. So that's what that slide was about. So let's keep going. I'm going to take a little drink of water. I don't quite know how to, I'm just going to. So when we're looking at encouraging sibling bonds, and we're talking about the bonds now that will also continue on across their lifespan. So what we're looking at to reduce conflict, or I guess even more than reducing it, because that also relies on so many things like temperament and personality and brain maturity, the ages of your children, how many children you have in the house. So that's all going to have an impact. But when we're looking at encouraging reducing conflict, we want the conflict to be a healthier kind of conflict, and we want it to be responded to by the siblings in a more constructive way, where they're both growing and their bond is actually strengthening, because they're seeing, hey, we can not get along sometimes and disagree, and then we can make it better and stay friends after that. So that's ultimately what we want to show them. So one of the ways we can do that is by helping them look for the good in each other. They don't have to, and we don't do this in a competitive way where because that is just like a disaster when siblings are competing against each other, when one gets a compliment and that compliment is based on something that's a deficit in the other child, and it's like, oh gee, look at your brother uses such great table manners, wouldn't it be nice if everybody used it? If we said something like that, then that's creating competition, and that leads to more conflict between siblings. What I mean by this is we focus on our children's strengths, but we also focus on what is it that is really lovely about these children, and what strengths do they have in common, because really what we want to convey to our kids is, you're on the same team, guys. Like, you are in this family together. You probably share some genetics, you share a home, you share these adults in your life, you share a whole bunch of stuff in this environment, and we want them to see, well, how are we connected? And we want them to be reminded that most of family life is actually really lovely, and there are so many times that they're getting along really well. Like many of you have said in the questions, they can be the best of friends. That's what we want to focus on. Well, what is happening when they're the best of friends? What is it that they have in common in that moment? What strengths do these kids share with each other? And also to think really deeply about what's the best way that our children connect. So think about things that you can do together as a family, or that they can do together as siblings, that they both, or if you have more than two children, that all 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 of them like doing together. Now, the bigger the group, the harder that's going to be. So you'll just use your common sense and your wisdom and your experience as a parent to come up with what it is that you think will be worthwhile and useful for them. So just think, how can you give them as many opportunities to get along and to do things that bring them a sense of a common ground, and ask them, we've got to involve them in that. If they're having trouble getting along with each other when everyone's calm, you want to role model to your kids that problems are normal. They're a normal part of life. So if they aren't getting along and things are getting particularly ugly, when they're calm, and at a time when they're most likely to listen, just show them you love them. And say something like, in your own words, I love you guys so much, and I've noticed you're having a really hard time getting along. It'd be really nice to hear each of you sort of share what might be going on for you, and what's not working, and what ideas do you have that will make things better. And then also to talk about, when is it working for you guys? What is it that you do like doing together? How do we do more of that? So children are more likely to respond when they're part of the process of finding solutions than when we're this top-down expert that basically tells them how it is. It's really important we involve them to what they're capable of doing. You're the expert of your family, their temperament, their developmental capabilities, so you adjust accordingly. But ultimately, that's the goal, is to involve them. And what I mean by them being the expert is, their problems are their problems, their problems between each other. We care about them. We want to show that they matter to us and that we want them to find a peaceful resolution, but we don't want to be giving out the answers all the time, because then we're the smarter, better person in the room. We want them to see I'm skillful, I'm capable. Yeah, I make mistakes, but my parents get that, and I'm still learning and growing. And the more that we can openly show that we too make mistakes and we too struggle, we're having this authentic experience with them as well, so that they see that this is all, you know, progress for us. We want to talk about sibling bonds. So not in a lectury kind of way where it's like, you're really lucky to have a sibling. You know, lots of children don't get to have a sibling, because that's just like automatic switch off. And we all do it from time to time because we love them and we want them to get along. So we'll like desperately just try to convey just how incredibly important this bond is. But we want to just casually, incidentally, when we can, talk about what a blessing it is to have a brother or sister, and to focus on what's lovely about their bond and what is working when they are getting along. You know, that golden rule, never interrupt. Happy play between siblings. Be late if you can be late to whatever you're about to go to, because it's those beautiful moments when they're in flow and they're getting along, and that's a great opportunity for you to say, you guys look like you were having the best time. Tell me all about what you were playing afterwards. And their brain is just growing with that feedback and that understanding that, yeah, you know what? We do get along a lot of the time. And so all of those things are really important. And finally on this slide is really expressing your family values to back up those sibling connections. So as I mentioned earlier, none of us follow, you know, we all have value systems. We're all trying our best to be very good citizens and to, you know, to do our absolute best. And most of us are doing a pretty good job of it. But the reality is nobody's perfect. Nobody's compassionate all the time. Nobody's forgiving all the time. Nobody's kind all the time. Unless you've really dedicated years of practice, conscious practice. We can all get there, but it is a conscious daily practice to work on those values. And children are no exception. In fact, it's much harder for them. So by having a family value system, you just think about, well, what do I care about? What do I want to lead this family in? I mean, we're leading our children and preparing them to fit in with the world in a positive and constructive way. They look to us, they learn from us. So we think about, well, what matters? What do I want to instill? Well, maybe for you, honesty is important. So then that would be one of your values. Or maybe compassion and empathy are important to you. So they would be some of your values. And what you do is, when they have a conflict, or really in any circumstance where there's a challenge, or even when things are going well, we might say things like, in our family, we try really hard to be kind. In our family, we try really hard to be honest. But because we're all learning, sometimes we make mistakes and we're not honest or we're not kind. And then what we do in our family is we do everything we can to make it better. So that repairing of relationships is far more effective than punishments or control or consequences, which basically are evidence to them that you've taken a side of one sibling over the other, and they'll just be looking at them across the table like, I'm not watching my favourite TV show because of you. And then they store that away in that head, and those conflicts grow. That's what grows, not their development of skills. So we just want to bring it back to values. We want to bring it back to repair. Again, that whole repair thing is a conversation. You sit down with them when everyone's calm. I talk a bit about family meetings in a moment as we get ready to wrap up. But we have these discussions when everybody's calm, not in the heat of the conflict and the challenge. So we say to them, what do you need to make things better when you feel like someone's hurt your feelings or hurt you physically? What do you need to make it better? And so we're empowering our children to have a say on how their emotions are healed and how they feel better. And so the more we involve them, the more we're building their emotional intelligence and their sense of confidence and autonomy, that they're capable citizens and that they're able to handle those challenges of life. So the way that we intervene as parents has an impact on sibling harmony in the long term. There's so much that we could go through, but we have such a short amount of time together, and I do want to cover a few more things. So just briefly, a really crucial thing is to safeguard our relationship with each of our individual children. When we look at the literature around sibling bonds and around sibling conflict, you know, one thing that keeps repeating itself is it's hard, you know. I understand. I have, you know, 3 children, and like you, I'm juggling all of the things that we parents juggle, plus that mental load that sits in the background of everything that we need to do that day and the next day and in the weeks to come, and all of that. But it's those micro moments of connection with each individual child that's separate to their sibling, that we're building our unique relationship with each of our children that's just special to us. So trying to find ways and asking for help where we can so that we can clear some opportunities. I know it's hard to do that, but just doing what we can. You know, all we can do as parents is work towards those goals. And if one of your goals is just to spend a bit more individual time with each child, that can reduce sibling conflict, because you're filling their emotional bucket in that moment and showing, you know, you matter to me separate from everything else. No matter how much I love your brothers and sisters, I love you just as much too. So that undivided attention and time, that unique relationship, finding what it is that you can do with each of your children that are uniquely meaningful to them. It's easy to want to just do what you feel like doing with them or think's good for them to do, or that you want to do as a family. But a really important thing is to have their voice and find out what they like to do and what they truly genuinely want to do if they get some alone time with you. So if the, you know, children experience our love in different ways and feel loved in different ways, just like us. So it might be that one child really wants to go out, and for them it's really meaningful to have time alone with you and eat somewhere or have a coffee. Another child might want to have a bike ride. Another child might just want to talk. Another child might want to sit there petting the dog. You know, but we've got to respond to what it is that's meaningful to them for that bond to connect with you. So you might be thinking, I don't really feel like sitting here for 10 minutes and petting the dog, but we've got to, at that moment, understand that that's where they're going to find that meaningful connection with us. So when we can, we just try to do that to strengthen our relationship with each of those individuals, and that will change over time. And we just ask them, like, what do you like doing with me, you know, and try and do it as much as we can. But because we're busy, and I can see from many of you've got really young children, some of you've got several children under 5, and it's so incredibly hard, isn't it, when they're still so little and they're so demanding of your attention and time. Being able to take one out is a really, really hard thing, because you're just constantly going to be interrupted, and then everyone gets frustrated. So, you know, use your intuition. It's those micro moments of connection. It might be even just creating a special handshake with each child, or having a secret little signal between the two of you that shows that you're saying, I love you. Saying things like, I'm just so glad you were born. I'm so glad you're in our family. You know, all of these things convey these messages that build a unique relationship with each of our individual children that can really help them with their siblings as well at the same time. So we want to make sure we focus on that. We want that relationship to be unconditional, where we let our kids be who they are. We can't change other people. We shouldn't try to change them. We certainly lead them with values. We teach them what is and isn't okay through healthy boundaries, but we let them be who they are, with all their irks and quirks, just like we all have. And that's where our true growth can really happen, is when we're accepted for who we are, and we know we're loved for who we are. We want them to know that no matter how much you love the other siblings, you love them just as much. And we can convey that by not coming in and saving arguments, by delegating who, saying who was right and who was wrong and defending. And we all get into that trap because we feel that emotion in that moment. And that's usually when we say and do things that we perhaps later think in retrospect, oh, maybe I could have handled that a little bit differently. We want to build in lots of unique connection habits through hugs, through handshakes, through whatever is meaningful, so that we build those bonds better. So when you can, you're coaching them, you're not saving them, you're teaching them skills instead of being that person that rescues them. Lots of you asked how to be calm. That's like literally a whole presentation on its own, is learning to manage our stress, learning to manage our emotions. If you're really losing it, often it's telling you that you're under so much pressure with parenting and with the other things perhaps you're juggling, and that your well-being really needs to be prioritized, and that you perhaps need to ask for some help so that you can have a bit of time to yourself and engage in some things that you're simply doing for the fun of doing it. Go back to some old hobbies. I know this is really, really hard. We all struggle with it, but just having that conscious awareness. To be calm, you've got to learn how to be calm, and that's a skill. So taking deep breaths, pausing, learning not to speak in that moment, making sure we're doing enough things in our day that are good and healthy for our well-being. These are all things that contribute to your mental well-being and impact on your ability to be calm. I've already mentioned, if you jump in defending and declaring who's right, the interpretation for a kid is, you love that one more than me. And then it just leads to more conflict. And then they hold that in their head and they don't take it out on you, they take it out on each other. So we really want to try and maintain a neutral position and show them that we can see they're both having a hard time with those words like, you guys have got a really tough problem and I really feel for both of you and I really hope that you can work this out. And really, before 5 or 6, they need you to help them work through it, and they need you to teach the skills. So if they don't know those skills at 10, then they still need you to help. It doesn't mean you help forever. It certainly doesn't mean that you're the decision maker on who's right and wrong and how the problem will be solved, but they might need your gentle, compassionate presence there while they work through it. And through that empathy and compassion, when you can, you're supporting them to build those tools in that moment with their sibling. We want to try and stay focused on the problem and depersonalize it. So it's like us against the problem. So when they come in dobbing on each other and they come in complaining with whatever's just happened, we want to try and avoid talking personally to the siblings. We all will struggle with this because we see, as adults with 20, 30, 40 more years experience than our children, we can see what the problem is very clearly. And so it's really hard to not point out, well, you did that and you should do it. It's so obvious to us, and we think we're helping them, but we're actually not. So when you can, just try to see it as, well, what do you think we should do about this? What do you guys, how can you guys meet halfway? Let's come back and talk about this when we're all calm. Let's take a break. Let's go outside. Maybe just do something funny and break that circuit in that moment. Do whatever it takes, what your intuition is telling you to do, to avoid it becoming something deeply personal where you might end up taking sides. We want to respond by teaching them skills to express their feelings. This is a crucial emotional intelligence skill that we all need to learn for our long-term ability to get along with others. So when we observe them in conflict, we might say something like, you don't look like you're enjoying that. You can tell your sister. So that's so much better than coming in and going, stop doing that, your brother's really upset, because you're doing the talking for them. And when you're doing the talking and the thinking for them, then again, you're being in that expert position. And ultimately our job as parents is to hand it over to our kids through our leadership and through the skills that we teach them over time, to go, oh yeah, I know how to do conflict. I know how to do life. I know it's uncomfortable, but I know what to do. I have the skills to deal with this. And if I don't deal with it well, I also have the skills to repair it and move forward from it without carrying it around like a club on my shoulder, you know, for another few months. So we want to encourage our children to express their thoughts and feelings. You can do that through role play. When everyone's calm, you can do it by discussing and saying, hey guys, you know, when you're upset with each other, I'm not going to be doing any talking for you. So what could you say if someone's doing something to you? What can you say to let them know that you don't like it? And prepare them that that doesn't mean that miraculously that sibling will then respect that boundary. This is what happens with underdeveloped brains, with little people, is they're still figuring out how to then let it go and not continue to pester and pursue to prove that they're right. So it's a long-term work in progress, but it's totally worth the effort of teaching the skills. I mean, we can't go anywhere without the skills. We may as well put some attention into focusing on building them. We want to look at what feeling might be behind the behaviour. Quite often it's jealousy and competition between siblings. So we want to make sure that we're showing them that they're equally likable and lovable just for who they are, not for how they're achieving or what they're achieving or how they're performing or who's doing better with the manners at the table or who's cooperating more. We want them to know that they are uniquely loved and accepted for who they are. We still have limits and boundaries, of course, but we want to make sure that there aren't lots of opportunities for them to feel that there's competition between siblings and there's a way to get more parental love or attention by being the better kid, the more capable kid, or whatever it is that they might feel is most valuable to you. So we want to keep an eye on that. We want to think about, sometimes it's hard when you've got more than, oh, I've missed one, sorry. Notice how tough the challenge is. I think I've spoken a bit about that anyways. Just coming in, they're completely losing at each other. They're not sharing perhaps, or someone's taken their stuff without asking, or someone just looked at them funny, or they can't agree on who's sitting in the front seat of the car on the way to school. You know the drill, whatever the conflict is in that moment, to just acknowledge their pain. Because acknowledged pain is not going to lead to accumulated pain that festers away unresolved and just leaves those yucky feelings hanging in there. So you might just simply walk in and just go, whoa, you guys are like having a massive argument. And sometimes even that, they're like, oh, are we? Because they're just off autopilot so much of the time, and they're in that moment of emotion. Or you might just say, wow, that's a really hard problem to solve. And now's not the time to figure this out. Let's all calm down. And you might role model taking some deep breaths. You might need to separate them. Someone was asking me, quite a few people asked me, what do I do when they're hitting each other? Well, that's really hard too. And we need to separate them. We need to keep each other safe, and we need to have those conversations away from the situation where we say, you know, when your feelings are big, it's really hard to control your feelings. And that's why people end up doing the wrong thing, and they might hit or they might say something mean. But in our family, hitting's not okay. We try to be kind to each other, and we need to make it better. So what's going to help next time that happens? What could you do differently? So we're just upskilling them on a continual basis. You might want to try, just in that moment, if you're helping them and you're showing them that you've noticed they're having a challenge, sometimes just coming a little bit closer and increasing your proximity and touching all children. I've written both children. I know many of you have many more than 2 children, and it certainly gets harder. But it's kind of like, you know, that group connection, that physical touch that says, I've been noticed. I'm noticed in this moment. I'm understood in this moment. And that simmers our emotions, and we have a better chance of coming to a calm resolution. And then the next thing is a really tricky one. It's knowing when to wait and watch and see, and when to step right in and shut that baby down. And that's a really, really hard thing, isn't it? Because it depends on the child. It depends on the situation. You know, we really want to be aware of that earlier slide about conflict and rivalry. You know, is this a kind of bicker where you can just reflect, you can be a narrator. I talk about the Peppa Pig narrator quite a lot when I do work with parents. You know how there's that narrator, you would have all seen it because you're all parents like me, and the narrator on Peppa Pig says, oh, Daddy Pig is feeling frustrated because Daddy Pig knows the way to the park, but Mummy Pig is asking him to check on the map, and Daddy Pig doesn't want to look at the map. Well, that narrator is explaining everything that's happening in front of your child when they're watching the program. And sometimes when we're able to be that narrator and go, look, you're both having a really hard time, you both want the same toy, you're feeling really upset about this, or you're both having a really hard time because your sister's wearing your jumpers as for teenagers, and you know, she didn't ask you, and you're really, really annoyed, and now she's not giving it back, and there's a stain, or whatever is going on. All of these things at different ages and stages, you adapt and respond where you show that you've noticed each of their pain, and that way you're not taking sides, and it's about coming up with a resolution. If they're bullying each other, so if they're really saying hurtful, mean things, it's really important we step in and call that behavior out and do everything we can. And that might need some outside help sometimes. Sometimes families need a little reset, and you need someone else to come in and put some fresh eyes and to really see why the siblings have got that nasty with each other. But if they're really picking on each other and really hurting each other, we want to again have these discussions outside of the conflict and say, you know, I've noticed that this is going on. Can we talk about what's going on and what might you know, be going on for you, and how I might be able to help you, because you're a really nice person, and I know you don't mean to hurt anybody, but that behavior is really, really hurting your brother or sister. So it's just this ongoing process of having these conversations and having enough respect for our children to know they've got their learner's plates on, and that they are still learning. And if we don't, you know, we can't control it, but we can have conversations about it and leadership about it and use our intuition. If your gut is telling you, nah, this is really hurting that kid, this is really crossing a line, step in and talk about it and discuss it and problem solve and look for support and help. If that's what you need, it's perfectly okay to do that as well. We want to focus, I've briefly mentioned, we're almost finished, to talk about making things better. You know, a lot of the questions I had, and certainly what parents I was, I just want them to say sorry. Well, sorry doesn't mean anything if it comes out something like sorry, and then they go away and just feel angry. You know, we really want to focus on repairing relationships with siblings and really understanding that conflict is part of any relationship. You're going to have different perspectives and you're not always going to get along. But when you don't handle that conflict in a respectful way, we really want our children to know that it's important to make things better. So that little image there is just a reminder that we need to consider having family discussions. Some people have a more structured process of a weekly family meeting. Other people are just happy to have these incidental chats where you sit down with your kids and you discuss a problem you're going through, but you do the least talking. So you say, you know, I've noticed you guys are like fighting the whole way to school in the car, or I've noticed you guys are really having trouble sharing at the moment. What do you reckon might help that? So what you're doing is you're handing the intelligence over to them. You're showing that you respect them as individuals to think towards solutions. Now, depending on the ages of your children, they'll come up with different responses, but we want to at least give them a chance. We want to talk about stuff. We want it to be healthy to discuss our problems instead of burying them away or taking matters into our own hands where the smartest, strongest person in that moment wins. So these discussions, and then we want to ask each child, you know, how do you feel better? What is it that we can do when your feelings are hurt to make things better? And really build some emotional intelligence in the family about what's meaningful to each person. They love each other so much. They want to get along. They don't want to be in conflict, but they also want to be heard. And those conflicts mean something to them. I'm going to talk briefly to you about handling your own emotions. One of the hardest things for all of us as parents is being that calm in the storm. Emotions are contagious. We get them from our kids and we give them to our kids. In that moment, forgive yourself. There's a reason why we have a little freak out when our kids are freaking out in front of us. It's because that's how we're wired as human beings, is we feel whatever's going in front of us. So when people are really losing it in front of us, we start to lose it a little inside ourselves. So just think of Australia's Funniest Home Video Show. Those of you who've seen that show or as old as me, when you're watching this show, you can see something's about to go wrong, and in that moment of impact, when that person's hurt, not badly hurt, but they're hurt in that moment, they go, oh, you go like this and you retract back. That's you feeling what's going in front of you without you having to experience it. And that's why it's really hard to be calm when our children aren't calm. So just knowing that helps me, just as a parent, to think, well, it's going to be hard to be calm, but it's important that I'm calm. And so I tell myself I'm calm. I love my child. I focus on what I love about them, and I focus on their strengths. I bring all of this, but this is with practice and time, and practice on other people's kids for a decade before I became a parent of myself. That was really useful too. But it's just a conscious decision to just keep working towards being as calm as you can, because that's always going to be the best position to be in to support our children. Say little, if anything at all, and be patient with yourself and celebrate your wins. If we were together in the same room, I'd be asking you to take a moment now to focus on how far you've come as a parent, how many things you've got through, how much you're already doing right and that is working, and to really celebrate that. We're always on to the things that we want to work on and do better at, and we forget just how far we've come as parents as well. So make sure you take some time to do that. We're almost there, an hour and a half together. Yes, I do talk a lot. We want to teach our children problem solving skills, and all that is coming up with as many solutions as possible for one problem, and testing the ideas out. So agreeing as a group in that family discussion perhaps, and saying, so what should we do about arguing in the car? And the kids all brainstorm. You keep as quiet as you possibly can, and then you choose together an idea to have a go with, and you have a go at that idea. If it works, great. It probably won't all the time. It might not work at all. So then when you chat about it again, you go, all right, well, I'm so glad we tried that. We know that doesn't work now. What should we try next? And you show your kids, we don't give up on our problems. We keep working towards solutions. We keep talking. We accept that we're not perfect. And we're really teaching them this is the color of life, because it is the color of life. We all know this from our experience of several decades on this planet, that things don't always flow smoothly. Problems are they're there for all of us all the time. And just when you think everything's going really well and you're feeling really excited, bang, something goes wrong, because that's life. That's just how it goes. So that's how we teach them about that. In that moment, we want to reflect back how each person feels without taking sides. Remember, this is really hard to do because children always fight at the most inconvenient times when you don't have time to sit down and do it. So you just do this when you can, or you invest in those conversations outside of the time of conflict to create a plan to cope with those moments, and say, look, at that time, I want you guys to really try, do what it takes to calm down, and then I want you to hear each other out, because you both think you're right. That's why you're having a disagreement. So you're just giving them this great knowledge about what's going on, and that's how they can grow from there. We express what the wants and needs are, showing empathy. Empathy is just gold. We know it's a crucial emotional intelligence tool for all of us. You think about, the best relationships you have are with people that have empathy for you, people who understand you and accept you, warts and all, and just understand. And really, for any aspect of parenting, when you can, if you can express your limits and boundaries, resolve those conflicts by starting first with showing that you get where they're coming from, by saying things like, I see you're having a really hard time, I understand, and then you can still state your limit and you can still say whatever you need to say. But by showing empathy, you're reconnecting with your child and you're helping soothe those emotions because they're feeling heard. If they don't feel heard, if they don't feel their emotions are acknowledged, they will do whatever it takes to prove to you that they're having a hard time, and things might continue to escalate. We want to teach them how to compromise, how to meet halfway. We want to explain what compromise is, that when you're having a disagreement with another person, one person thinks you should do it this way, the other person thinks you should do it another way, and sometimes you can't agree, but you can compromise. You can meet halfway where everyone involved gets a little bit of what they want. When we look at this slide, it's just a reminder that, you know, what we see in behavior, what we see in conflict is just the tip of the iceberg. There's always other stuff going on. There's unmet needs, there's missing social emotional skills, and we've got to figure out what that is. And in that moment, if we get involved and we decide who's right and who's wrong, it's likely to escalate the conflict or mean that they have more conflict later on with each other, because we're making a judgment based on the tip of the iceberg without knowing what happened 5 minutes before, 2 hours before, 3 hours before, 4 days ago. So we don't have that information, which is why we want to stay out of conflict as much as possible. So if you'd like some more information, I've got some books on my website, positivemindaustralia.com.au. All of these books are practical tools for parents, teachers and educators and health professionals that teach social emotional literacy and confidence and well-being and resilience. So feel free to check those out. I also have lots of free downloadable resources on children's grief, family separation, handling technology and other bits and pieces that you're very welcome to download and use with your family, or if you're working with children in another capacity in schools and healthcare settings. That little teeny barcode that you can see down there takes you to all of my social media pages, and that will link you up with lots of free tips to support your family to continue to build these tools. I would like to go right back to the very first slide and thank my beautiful co-host Parenting SA. They have a wonderful website. They're incredibly hardworking people. They have a really lovely tip sheet on handling sibling conflict, which I'm pretty sure, I can't promise, but I will do my very best to send in the link with this. It should be all attached with the recording for tonight's session. So thank you so much, Parenting SA, for inviting me to speak on this topic. Thank you all for your time. I hope that's been useful. I'm sorry I couldn't answer the thousands of questions that have now that have come through, but I did feel as I was reading them that we were covering most of them. I wish all of you the very best. Remember not to take it personally if things are still challenging, and it's okay to ask for help. We're all in this together, and I really appreciate you joining me tonight. All the very best to you.